I'd like to start by saying thank you all for coming today. It's an honor to have you here in the culminating event of my student teaching career thus far. And without further ado, we're going to get started. So, this final presentation will be posed in 3 phases. Dr. Foster went ahead and posed us with 3 questions that we'll answer throughout the presentation today. The first is, who do I aspire to be as a teacher? And this is a difficult question to ask. First, we're going to start with a little bit about me. I am obsessed with growth mindset philosophy, and I love turning you can'ts into I can's. And that's represented up here with my 3 articles of clothing that I have, starting with the FFA State Officer jacket, my 9 years that I spent in 4-H, and then my internship that I did at Pennsylvania Farm Bureau. All 3 of those things were something that at one point someone told me, you can't do that for various reasons, and I went ahead and turned that into an I can. And that's what I hope to instill into my students in every way possible, is getting them to believe in that growth mindset. One of the things that is at the core of your teaching is your philosophy. And while the 3-circle model is a great component and the core of every excellent ag program, you have to realize that there's some other details to get the ball rolling and keep it rolling. For instance, in mine, if you turn to page 3, I think mine is the cover page is page 1, you will see my infographic for my teaching philosophy, and you'll see that I include the community in it, cross-curricular activities to include the rest of the school in it, and then real-life assessments. I don't want to be teaching students to take paper tests. I want them to be practicing their careers and potentially getting into college from the practicum skills that they have. And then I have my classroom management plan. I went ahead and implemented Dover's expectations into my classroom management in addition to my own, and that's going to start with a bell ringer. So the bell ringer is verbiage that's used across the high school there, and it's to kind of show unity for the students among their classes. They expect to come in and see a bell ringer, and they're expected to get to work. It's consistent throughout all classes of that high school. And then we do an agenda. So I will have a copied agenda for them at the front of the class, every class session, and this is something for them to strike out as they go so they can see the progress that they're making. And then a tech break. So at Dover, we're on block schedule. It's a 90-minute period, and they have what's called fly zones and no-fly zones. So in their classes, or in between their classes, in the hallways, they're allowed to use technology. That's what they call a fly zone. In class, it's a no-fly zone. And then one thing that Mrs. Barzillo implements is a temporary fly zone. It's a contract between the students and her that they will not use their phones, technology unless prompted, unless she gives the go-ahead for a temporary fly zone. And that's just a verbal contract that she has with them. That way that they're giving her the 110% that they can, and she, in exchange, lets them have 5 minutes to get some other things settled, like emails, classwork, submitted, things of that nature, because they might not have Wi-Fi at home to do that. And then we always close with connections. Summarizing strategy is needed at all lesson plans. That way we can connect not only all the elements of that lesson today, but what was covered yesterday and what is to be covered the next day. And then we go into the expectations. The Dover Area School District is the Eagles, and you can see based on what I have here, I expect effort. You can't learn unless you put in the effort to learn. I expect them to ask questions if they have them. I don't want to waste time with confusion. Asking them ahead of time is great. Goals and working toward the goals. Learn in your own way. So one of the first things we learned about in 412 is the 3 modalities and 8 multiple intelligences. And of course, I can't teach to every multiple intelligence, every activity, but I expect them to be able to use and adapt their knowledge into the way that they learn best. And then everyone will be accepted, promoting inclusion into my classroom, and then succeeding together. We're a team in the classroom. You learn from your peers as much as you learn from the teacher. And then the last one is consequences. And this is based off of the restorative justice model. I first found out about this model over the summer while I was at my internships. What I would do as I was doing these extensive research projects would be listening to podcasts. And I was listening to the Cult of Pedagogy, and she had a guest speaker on there that talked about restorative justice, and it made a lot of sense to me. So yes, I will follow the guidelines set out in the Dover Area Student Handbook, which dictates when you contact the parents, when you have 2-way communication with the parents, when you refer to the principal, things of that nature. So that's already detailed out for me, and I will never stray from what the school has set out for me. But I do want to have specifically point out this third criteria here is that we must have a discussion about it. So an example of going down this consequence system, if a student walks into my class and has a hat on, I'm going to remind them the rules are you have to take the hat off. You're inside the school building, you have to have that hat off. If they don't want to take it off, I'm going to say, warning, my policy is this and your consequence is this, will you please take the hat off? And if they choose not to take the hat off at that point, then we're going to have to continue with the school consequences, but we're going to have a discussion after class as to what motivated him to keep that hat on, him or her to keep that hat on. So that comes in with the restorative justice. I might not know some background information there. Maybe he was embarrassed about his haircut, maybe he was beaten up at home and has a bruise on his head. I don't know that, and I want to find out why. So the restorative justice model helps me find out why. And then my model curriculum. So you learn a lot about a teacher with what they want in their ideal program. So my intro to AF&R, I went ahead and plugged in. First, we're going to learn about the science of agriculture, and then we're going to get into the components of the different components of agriculture. And yes, for Dr. Ewing, I did throw in ag mechanics. If you know me, last year when I was looking at student teaching placements, I was terrified of ag mechanics. I didn't know much theory about ag mechanics. I was not confident in my ability to teach that, and after the 2 semesters that I had with him in ag mechanics, I couldn't imagine going to a program without it. And then I aspire to be in a single teacher program. That's not a deal breaker, but my ideal program being in a single teacher program would to be flip off and on for even and odd years, starting with plant and soil science, and then floriculture, greenhouse management, animal science flipping off with animal and anatomy and physiology flipping off to production and management, natural resource management and wildlife and fisheries science. And then if you notice, at that point students would only have 3 classes, so their 4th class they could choose to be in international agriculture and policy and agricultural mechanics. And then what you see below there, I should have said earlier, was the units that I plan to incorporate into each of those classes. So next we had, for AE 350, we completed a comprehensive lab integration plan. For me, I decided to do a traditional agriculture mechanics lab. And with that, I would include the safety contracts that are expected from the students, expected from the parents, and they would have to have a 100% on their lab safety exam prior to entering the shop. One of the projects I aspired to do with them would be to have this boot rack. It is a $15 project, so it would be economically feasible to do in an ag classroom. But what it is, you would set it on the ground here like this. They would step on it in the back and pull their boot off as such. The skills that they used in this, we did arc welding, this is MIG welding, we used a hacksaw here, and then we also used a hot cell metal bender. So it is a pretty inclusive metal fabrication project. I'll go ahead and pass this around. One of the flex things that you can do with that project, I have it unpainted and not much done finishing wise, so you can see what all went into it. But if students finish this ahead of time, you can see that some students would finish faster, some students would finish slower. The students that finished faster would go ahead and wire wheel their horseshoes, paint them, and detail them however they want to. So they would have extra time to do that while the other students were completing the project. And then in my lab integration plan, which I have in a folder back here, you can see the costs associated with building an ag mechanics lab if the school that I go to doesn't have one existing. And then also there's the SAE integration, so incorporating that 3-circle model. All of my students in the Intro to AF&R course would have the a foundational SAE, and then from there they would go into an immersion SAE, and that would be one of these 5 here. So the foundational SAE, for those of you who don't know, really sets a groundwork for them to explore possible career areas that they're interested in, and then the immersion SAE, with whatever career area that they have and what resources you have in the school, would be them to further explore that career that they chose in their foundational SAE. Through that, I hope to teach financial literacy, data interpretation, and demonstrating career readiness. To implement the SAE integration, I would have a year-round, an extended contract to do year-round SAE visits. You can see June, July, and August would be my heaviest months for SAE visits, and then December and February being the least heaviest, just because students tend to be out of school that time of the year. Planning will be difficult at that time of the year, things of that nature. You can see I also plan for weekday visits and weekend visits to accommodate student scheduling. The FFA integration. So in Pennsylvania, we're an affiliate state, so all of my agriculture students would be FFA members, and I aspire to make sure that's implemented in the FFA chapter. So I would encourage inclusivity by, for instance, trips with limited number of seats would be by application, not first payment. I recognize that some of my students in the chapter may not have the ability to pay right away, and that would potentially limit them if I went ahead and did whoever hands me the check first gets it. So by application first, and then also CDEs and LDEs would align with their interests, not just what I have experience in. So I personally am a horse girl. I would do very well at the horse evaluation CDE, and I've also done parliamentary procedure, but that doesn't mean my students are going to want to do that. And then also inclusion is going to be stressed to all the students. I would not tolerate bullying or not inclusivity. My FFA integration, this is the bare bones structure of what I would want to do. Obviously, it's a student-run organization, so it's up to the students how far they want to get involved. But you can see I would have a monthly chapter meeting, a banquet, we would attend state events throughout the year, and then we would have various community projects and school-wide projects for the FFA chapters to become engaged in. And then also by March, I aspire to have my CDE teams up and running and coaching so that the rest, when it comes down to going to the summer convention, they are well prepared for that. And then a key part of doing a chapter is getting people to come to your chapter. So we have a recruitment plan. This is from Bald Eagle FFA, just down the road here. While Beth, Brooke, and I were micro-teaching, we decided to utilize some of the students for this project. Now, the audio is pretty spotty in the beginning, so we're going to go ahead and start and watch the last minute of it.
In my FFA group, I did it for a speech competition, and it's about indoor rabbits, so I can inform all about it.
My project being a school, I raised them, and I helped meet the rabbits, and so future babies, I guess.
One of the legs.
I found him. I didn't throw it this time.
So in that recruitment plan there that you see, in the beginning what you missed was inclusivity, so we detailed that you can be from an ag background or a non-ag background, and then the different things that you can do to become involved in the FFA chapter. Also, a key part of my philosophy was community-based unit of instruction. So my plan is at Dover Area School District. In small animal science, the first unit I'll be teaching is small animals as pets. And to do the community-based unit of instruction, I plan to have a pre-K teacher come into the class, show the kids how to kind of write to a pre-K level. It's difficult being that they're high schoolers now and they're above that level. They may not realize what their reading was like when they were in preschool. And then once they have the idea of how to write it, I have them implement the idea of responsibility and what exactly that pet will need to care for the pet, because preschoolers want pets. They want to interact, but they don't always realize the responsibility behind it. And then we'll go ahead and take a field trip to that pre-K school. They will have physical books that they've made. Each student will get a book, and then they will read to the students, engage in questions, and go from there. But these are some examples of children's books on small animals that will be given to my students as examples to use. Phase 2 is what experiential education opportunities have I engaged in to become a better agriculture educator? There are 3 specific classes that really stuck out to me at Penn State. First is ANSI 201 with Dale Olver. It is the catch-all of everything animal science. It's one of the hardest classes I've ever taken. But I literally pulled that book out so many times and just regurgitated the information from that folder into my units. It's helped me a lot. And then the second is horticulture 201 and 301. I apologize, you can't see the photos very well. But the assignment that I did in that class was every day in 201 we would climb trees. And this really impacted me because for our final we had to climb up to here in this tree and get 3 clipboards. Well, 2 were up here and then 1 was way out on this limb that I had to climb out to. It's nerve-wracking to take a final in a tree, but it really taught me the value of testing your practicum skills, not just a written test. So that professor really nailed that one out, and like it blew my mind that that was something we were able to do. So I truly appreciate him demonstrating that for me, and that's something I want to demonstrate to my students. Written tests don't have to be the only form of summative assessments. And then AE 349 and 350. That was put in there because mastering what scares you. Once again, I started with a fear of ag mechanics, and now I can't imagine going into student teaching at a school that didn't have ag mechanics. My minor is in political science. Most people ask me why did I do that. It is in the College of Liberal Arts, and those are the 6 classes I took. I essentially did that because I love ag policy, and if you revert back to what I did for my model program, I have an ag policy course. I want to teach students, particularly in the instance that not all students go to college, I want to teach them how ag policy affects them on the farm or affects them in their careers involving agriculture. So that's why I specifically chose that minor, and that's what got me the internship in government and communications at Pennsylvania Farm Bureau. I'm certified in NSTMOP, First Aid CPR, and OSHA 10 Agriculture. Both of those additional certifications are addressed around student safety in the workplace, and I definitely intend to utilize those in the chapter. I'm a nationally accredited parliamentarian. I got that my senior year of high school. Once again, I'm going to be used a lot in the chapter, both in chapter meetings and if my students decide they want to have a Parley Pro team. Professional development. Fortunately, the PWE summer conference was at my school district that I'm going to be student teaching at, and we did a couple different workshops there. The NWE convention in San Antonio, Texas, as pictured below. I was a lead society member, so that is a form of informal PDE, or professional development, and you kind of bounce ideas off of your peers, get professional development from them and just different perspectives. And then I also participated in the Alpha Tau Alpha Conclave twice, once my freshman year as Parley Pro, and once my senior year as a co-author for an essay. The cohort and Penn State family bonded quite a bit also. So one of the things that we do to leave the woodpile higher is FLC. So we have the underclassmen shadow us as one of our co-teachers so that they get integrated up. And then this is also an example of leaving the woodpile higher. We ask the underclassmen to come in and get examples of their final presentation to see what is all involved in the major. And then we have the Teach Ag chats. We spend lots of time in Ferguson till late hours of the evening doing schoolwork. And then too much is given, much is expected. So this year we were given our virtual mentor team, and we were given that. We weren't expected to do, we weren't given strict guidelines of what to do. We were expected to engage and utilize that team for our benefit. And I had an awesome virtual mentor team that really put their whole effort into helping me develop as a person. Internships and work experience. As I mentioned, I was a state officer. I was an intern at Hershey Gardens part-time, and then I also was an intern at Pennsylvania Farm Bureau in Government and Communications. I specifically chose these internships just to get into areas that I wasn't as comfortable with in agriculture. Also, if you'd like, you can check out hashtag PFB internship on Twitter. That I did some different tweets throughout. And you can see what all I did. This picture below, we went to a recycling ag plastics facility, and the gentleman, all those in the back are bales of some kind that he said retain water so much that he had to store them and let them dry for months on end, and then he went ahead and recycled that into ag plastics. Global engagements. I was, with my political science minor, in the class of international law and organizations, had the ability to go to Switzerland. We were in the UN, and we're in Geneva, and went to the capital, which is Bern, and got extensive amounts of global learning through that. Specifically on the policy end of things, just because that's, once again, where I just find my interest the most. And then I participated in the Global Learning Ag Conference in 2018, and I was graciously given a certification to get in 2019 as well. And once again, I plan to utilize my global involvement in the classroom by having Worldwide Wednesdays. It may just be 10 minutes, it may be the whole class, but my students will somehow learn that agriculture is a global network now, and that there's global implications to everything we do. Domestic engagements, I was able to participate in the Domestic Study Away to Wisconsin, and through the FFA I traveled to Massachusetts, Indiana, Tennessee, Delaware, and Kentucky, just to name a few. And then to begin phase 3, how am I prepared to maximize my student teaching internship opportunity? So, as I mentioned, I'm going to be student teaching at Dover Area School District. My cooperating teacher is Mrs. Alex Barzillo, but it is a 3-teacher program. All 3 teachers have their own classroom. Ms. Marsh teaches horticulture classes, Intro to Ag Mechanics, and Intro to AFR. Ms. Barzillo teaches most of the animal science classes, food science, and Intro to AFR as well. And then Mr. Bowen, who came to us through a non-traditional route, teaches small gas engines on automotive repair, advanced ag mechanics, and then some other CTE courses. He came from a different CTE branch in the middle school, got certified in ag, and came up through, and he truly has embraced the 3-circle model and getting his students involved in that program. The school does run on block schedule, which is challenging for me. I come from a school that had 42-minute periods, and I'm trying to teach in a 90-minute block, and that's difficult for me, but I appreciate that I get to do more hands-on activities and really get in depth before my students have to leave the class. After school, the CTE department is so well supported. When we were there at PAAE, the CTE director came and toured us through the entire CTE department. Specifically, the ag department is well supported also. They have been in the process of getting certification for science classes, or for ag classes to count as science classes. And then also, when I was looking at student teaching placements, they mentioned that they're going to try to branch into cross-curricular events. They said currently the environmental science teacher there does work with them quite a bit, but I was curious to see, and they mentioned to me that they have plans to expand it, so I was curious to see how that process would go, seeing that that is something that I want to implement in my future ag program. And then the evaluation of the cooperating center. So I have the full evaluation in my program planning handbook, which I can pass around later. But essentially, the 3-circle model is something that's tested throughout that Chapter 339 review. They have excellent academic rigor. So Mrs. Barzillo in particular really stresses the scientific method, really pushes inquiry-based learning. She doesn't want to spoon feed her children knowledge. She wants them to work for it. And then all the courses have a capstone project, which is infused throughout the course for project-based learning. An example of this that I will be using is in large animal science. They do a portfolio project. So it starts on week 3. They get their first assignment of the portfolio project, and then they have, I think, a total of 7 components of that project that they do throughout the class. And then at the end, they synthesize it into one complete portfolio that they've done for one animal species. There's a form of that in every course that those teachers teach, so that way a capstone project and a culminating effort is included in that course. Their FFA involvement, they have a large activity period every day at their class, or at their school. And students come down and they have regular chapter meetings, and their chapter events are well attended. Although at state level they usually have between 5 and 10 members, I am curious on to see how I can increase that number. I particularly really want to engage with a student teacher, a CDE team. They didn't have a complete team compete at this past state convention, and I'm hoping with how well that their courses that I'll be teaching align with different CDE teams that I will be able to implement becoming a CDE coach for them. Also, their SAE involvement. So all students do have an SAE at Dover, whether it's a school-based SAE is the most prominent one there. Like I said, the portfolio assignment. Also, Mr. Bowen does an ag engine rebuild in his class, and the students use AET to track their expenses and incomes for the different projects and the time spent that they do in those projects. So all of them have exposure to the AET tracker, but most of them don't have home projects. There are a handful that do have home projects that Mrs. Barzillo does do SAE visits for. And then pages 4 and 5 of your handout there has the full list of the calendar of experience that I'm going to be doing. So it has my FFA days, the days that Dover is out of session. The one I want to kind of clarify for this is in January, their semester ends on Tuesday, and they realized since the students are out Thursday and Friday that they didn't want to start the new semester there. So they have what's called a college and career day. The students won't be coming to our classes that day. So my official first day of student teaching will be on that 22nd day after Martin Luther King Day. This is the course of study that we have implemented here. We have the 4 units that I will be teaching the whole time with large animal science up until the day that we leave. And then we have 4 units of ag educare that I will have with Mr. Bowen, 2 units of natural resource management with Miss Marsh, and then the 4 units with Mrs. Barzillo again. I do have the 3 open slots. If the classes get pushed back, I will be able to continue teaching those while I'm there, but as I mentioned, I will be student teaching with large animal science that whole duration of time. That way my minimum days are met. And then I do have all my units and summative assessments made up here in the binders. It is by class, and then they are tabbed for the units. All the units have a summative assessment already made in them, and they do include the essential elements that Penn State has put out. So I can pass those around at the end also for you. Specifically, I was asked to make lesson plans for 18 classes. I think that's how it worked out, 18 lessons. My whole first unit of large animal science is completed. My whole first unit of small animal science and my whole first unit of natural resources. So that worked out with animal agriculture as a science in the first category. Small animal science is animals as pets. And the natural resources actually on tragedy of the commons, which I've run across quite a few times in my college career in both economics and political science, but I haven't seen it much in the environmental science portion of things. So I'm really excited to go ahead and apply that into the classroom for environmental science. Once again, my political science minor coming in handy there for me. My strengths as a student teacher, I am great at faking it till you make it. So if I know the baseline knowledge to get through a class, I can definitely push through that. But I'm also willing to say, I don't know, let's research that. I fully acknowledge I'm not a master in every area of agriculture, and I'm going to learn with my students. I'm eager to learn, and I will be moldable to what my cooperating teacher, my virtual mentor, and my university supervisor has for me. And then I have a foundation of basic knowledge in most areas of agriculture, enough to get by so that I can teach my students. But if you go over to my weaknesses, I'm not comfortable in those advanced areas of agriculture. It really does push me. So I will, at that point, I will have to fully admit to my students, hey, I don't know this, let's learn together. Another weakness is I tend to be a perfectionist. So I have to get over the fact that Dr. Ewing is smirking over there. I have to get over the fact that I am so hung up on the details that may not always go as smooth as possible, but realize that students are still learning. I may not be fit to exactly what that lesson plan is doing, but they're getting something from that. And I have to get over that. So that leads to my 3 personal goals as a student teacher. So I will focus less on perfection and more on growth. I will learn advanced ag content with my students, admitting I don't know everything. And I will process and utilize feedback of my cooperating teacher, virtual mentors, and university supervisor. Once again, with that growth mindset, turning you can't into I can. So, with that, without further ado, we will proceed to questions.
We will. Let's give a round of applause. We're really proud of you. Thank you for your hard work in preparing for this presentation and answering those essential questions. We will provide a period of time that we rotate between our live audience, our virtual audience, and the teacher education panel for questions about Lisa's individual experience, because we all know that we're not here making widgets. Everybody's unique when they go through this Teach Ag journey. So I start with our live audience. Is there a question you have about Lisa, about something she shared or what she may be looking ahead to? Ms. Fisher. Ms. Fisher completed her student teaching last spring.
So Lisa, I saw that on your course of study that you do get to be with all 3 teachers, and you'll be moving from classroom to classroom.
Yes.
Do you have a plan in mind of what your transition from classroom to classroom between periods is going to look like? Well, do you already have a way to project the bell work? Is there expectations put in place for if you're not in the room when the students start coming in?
Of course. So between classes, I will have the opportunity. I'm planning to have a rolling cart and be one of those teachers, but load myself on this rolling cart. And my day starts out with Mr. Bowen in Ag Engine Care, and then my longest commute is between his classroom and Mrs. Barzillo's classroom. It's not too far; it's just around the corner. And I plan to have all of my bell work and agendas on a PowerPoint slide for that day. I actually utilize PowerPoint not as a lecture tool, but as a form of flow for me to know. So I will have my instruction sets for my activities up there. That way I don't avert too far off course. Once again, that perfectionism coming in from my lesson plan. That way it keeps me on track. So the Mrs. Barzillo would have access to my Google Drive, and I would be able to pull it up pretty quickly to get my bell work and agenda up and running for my next class. And then I would have that prep period, and then I would go into my small animal science. And then Ms. Marsh's room is actually even closer than Mr. Bowen's, so the transition between those two aren't bad. So I just have that one class that I kind of have to hurry to.
It is fun to see how we connect back to the family. I try to make sure I make those connections evident. You get to work with a graduate of PSU Ag at 9 as a cohort group and PSU Ag at 13 who've gone through the iterations of this program. How about a question from our online audience?
All right, this question comes from Facebook Live from Amanda Gagnon.
Okay.
So Amanda will be a member of PSU Ag at 20.
Amanda has a 2-part question. She wants to know what challenges you would face in a single teacher program, and how can your students be engaged in all 3 parts of Ag Ed without everything being put on you?
Okay, so that's a great question. In a single teacher program, this is something I've thought through a lot. My students wouldn't have the opportunity to get in depth with a lot of the different curriculum, and I would have to do the even odd year flip off. But being in a single teacher program, I would be responsible for a lot of the planning, but I do plan to utilize the Forum and FFA alumni chapter early in my career, and then utilize that FFA alumni chapter to do things such as CD18 coaching, or have them help me plan events, things of that nature. But in that single teacher program, evidently the buck stops with me, and I would have to step up to the plate with a lot of stuff, and I have thought that through, and I don't think that's a drawback for me personally being in a single teacher program.
Excellent, thank you so much.
Dr. Curry will share from the teacher education panel.
Lisa, we talk a lot about knowledge, skills, and dispositions of being a teacher. You spoke a lot to knowledge and skills, a lot climbing trees with skills in 350, learning how to weld, doing all that kind of stuff. And obviously we've learned a ton about knowledge about being a good teacher. Can you give me a disposition this fall that you've sort of honed in on or gotten better at being a teacher?
Definitely. Disposition I honed in on would be patience. A teacher has to be patient with everything they do with a student. They aren't going to learn in the way you want them to. They aren't going to do everything the way that you want them to. Once again, with perfectionism, just letting go and being patient with them, and it's their learning experience, not your teaching experience. So getting past that, and a disposition of every great teacher I've been with is patience.
Thank you. I like that. Their learning experience, not just your teaching experience. How about from our audience? Ms. Liska, member of PSU Ag at 20?
So you talked about your state officer experience. How do you think that will help you when you go into your student teaching?
Yes, excellent question. So in my state officer experience, I had the opportunity to visit, I think it was 37 when I did chapter officer visits, 37 different chapters. And I, being at those 37 different chapters, saw the inner workings of a lot of different programs and how they function. So not one chapter was the same as another, and I got to compare multi-teacher versus single-teacher programs. I got to compare programs that didn't have an ag mech lab or didn't have a greenhouse. And when I was there, I had the opportunity to really compare and figure out what I wanted in my own program, and that's actually where a lot of my core beliefs came from with wanting that single-teacher program. I just had that awesome experience. And then also I had the opportunity to work with students. So I had that extra year under my belt of working with high school students. Granted, I was only a year removed, But I learned a lot of classroom management techniques coming from there. Proximity was my best friend, and that's something that really helped us here in our labs. Mr. Brammer instilled that to us when a student's misbehaving or when they're just having side conversations, just your proximity to them ended that conversation really quickly. And I took for granted my early classroom management techniques until I got to my senior year here when I was micro-teaching. I was able to utilize those, and they were already second nature to me compared to students who didn't have that opportunity.
Thank you. From our virtual audience.
Okay, this question comes from Katie Smith. And
Katie Smith
she
is a
wants
graduate
to
of
know
PSU, I get 18.
what unit or lesson that you are not familiar with are you most looking forward to learning with your students?
So that leads straight to my ag engine care. Dr. Ewing was the brunt of all my confusion this semester in planning for this, but needless to say, all the units are prepared and well set to go. I could be great at teaching a unit of ag engine care, a whole course on it. I don't know. So once again, that's coming in with the advanced part of ag engine care, the advanced part of ag mechanics that I'm not so familiar with. But I will be co-teaching more so with Mr. Bone on a lot of the days. And then at least a full unit, I will be just a single teacher in that class. So I definitely will be learning with the students. As you can see, we have 3 weeks built out just for engine disassembly and troubleshooting. I can't troubleshoot a motor. Like, I can get the basics down, but I can't do that. So Mr. Bowen and my students and I are all going to work together with that engine manual and figure it out.
Lisa, I think it was time for your final question. And as we think about the path that you've been on, you are rapidly moving to a time where you're going to have to answer this question very quickly. And so I'm about to give you a question, and I'm looking for the elevator answer. That means I need it in 30 to 60 seconds. So you know that the clock is running. Your audience, I am a high school principal at Rio Deal High School. Why should I hire you?
Specifically to hire me, that's a really hard question. Give me a second to gather my thoughts. Is the clock actually
No,
running?
it's not yet. Mental thoughts. I do a mental countdown and I'll point at you.
Okay.
There's a second timer right here.
All right, so you should hire me because I am, as I presented today, willing to learn with my students, willing to give my students my all, willing to let the students have a say in their learning experience, and then I have the skill set, the disposition, and the knowledge that is required of a successful agriculture education program that I feel my philosophy really backs up.
If we can only all be lifelong learners. That's an excellent answer. Let's give her a round of applause.